That's a little ominous. I
Honey.
don't know how I feel about this.
Recorded.
All right.
Go
Well,
off, honey.
well, on that note, welcome everybody to Coffee with Queers. Really happy to see all of you. So just want to start by briefly acknowledging that we are speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Shasta, Takelma, and Lakawa tribes. As you're doing your introduction, if you're not here and wish to share where you're speaking from, please do. Thanks for the space. One, you're always at choice in this space. If you don't want to answer a question or you need to go, use the restroom, do whatever, totally welcome. Two, respect one another. We've all listed our pronouns in our names, so we're encouraging everyone to use each other's preferred pronouns. Three, step up, step back. We can all acknowledge and recognize some of us speak more, some of us speak less. So let's be mindful and make space for each other here. Four, no unsolicited advice giving or fixing. And five, we want to remind everyone, as the lady said, this conversation is being recorded and will likely be online, made available to queer youth and clinicians. So please share, just keeping that in mind. So to start, we're going to go around the circle, share our names and how you identify your gender and sexual orientation, and maybe just a little bit about what that means to you. How did you come to find your own identity, chosen labels, and pronouns? So I can start. My name is Desiree. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm currently exploring my sexual identity. I guess the term is questioning, although it doesn't feel totally accurate because I know who I am. I consider myself bisexual. I think I'm just learning to give myself permission to call myself queer. It's been kind of a journey, especially as a woman of color, to embrace all aspects of myself, and especially living a good chunk of my life in rural communities. So that's me. And we'll kind of tag each other just to keep this flowing. And I'll tag Sophia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Mathakis. I grew up in the Applegate Valley in Southern Oregon. Currently live in the Eugene area, which occupies the ancestral land of the Kalapuya Nation. I identify as queer pretty much across the board, queer in terms of sexual orientation and in terms of gender identity. I go by they, them. I began identifying as queer when I was in college, trying to find an accurate label for myself to describe my feelings, and then also pay respect to the different kinds of relationships I had, and be respectful of and acknowledging of the various identities of the people with whom I had those relationships. And queer felt like the best fit in terms of something that felt inclusive of a lot of those things. Genderqueer and they, them is a more recent development. Genderqueer, I'd say since college, on and off, depending on what community I was in and how comfortable I felt with myself and acknowledging my own identity. And they, them, I've been using for the last few years. That's felt more indicative of my early feelings when I was in college, that I started to find the language to be able to use and felt comfortable using. Was there any other, did I hit everything?
Yeah, that's great. You just tag someone.
Okay, so Michael, how about you?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Michael. He, him, his are my pronouns, please. So I grew up kind of living a dual life in a rural but also urban section. So I lived in Detroit, but also I spent a lot of time in a small township called Whitmore Lake with my grandparents. And so I didn't have a lot of opportunities to kind of explore my gender identity or sexual orientation until I accessed an online community in Michigan. But I didn't fully embrace my gender identity and sexual orientation until I moved out to Oregon, and found my chosen family. So I am gay. I didn't really know what that meant to me until I came out here. And of course, I'm emotionally and sexually attracted to other men. And so that was kind of my experiences. And I think that's it. So I'm going to pick Elise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elise Chow. I identify as a pansexual cisgender woman. I have only started using the term pansexual in the last 3 to 4 years. I think I always, as a child, knew, that I was attracted to people regardless of gender identity, but it took a long time for me to have the vocabulary for that, and then an even longer time for me to feel comfortable going all in and committing. So that's pretty much me. I will tag Connor.
Okay. Hello. I was in the midst of writing some notes down, so I'm glad I got tagged a little bit further down the line. I grew up in the Rogue Valley in Medford. I was born and raised there. My whole entire family lives there for many, many generations. And I lived there from birth to 18. I came out kind of socially in high school. It was pretty, as my best friend said, there wasn't really a closet to hide in. I was just like one of those folks that was just very flamboyantly queer from the kind of beginning. So, kind of out socially at 15, and then got outed unconsensually by my family at 17, and that sort of changed a lot of things. Got kicked out of the house, and finishing high school and working 2 jobs while couch surfing and that kind of stuff was very, very interesting. So that was kind of the first half of my life. And in the last 15 years, I've lived in Portland. So right as this time in my current adult life, I live on the unceded land of the Chinook, Multnomah, and Clatskanie people, and I'm sure others that we're not aware of. And this has been my home for the last 15 years or so. So I kind of latched on to being like labeled as like a dyke or a masculine center lesbian person, because that was the closest thing at that time that I could identify with. I am a trans man and kind of grew up with that sort of like lesbian background experience, because that was kind of the closest community that I could find at that time that would allow me to express myself in a masculine way with in any sort of like sense of safety. So that was kind of the first thing I latched onto. But then when I moved away from home, I moved to Portland in 2006, like literally 6 days after I graduated from high school. I was like, see you later, had the truck packed, ready to go. And I landed at the Queer Youth Center in Portland, which really helped formulate and shape my sort of path to figuring out who I was. I just didn't have any idea where to start. And they had like free therapy and groups and support and community and all of those things. And I was able to kind of experiment and figure out what worked for me. So about 18 is when I came out as trans, and have been out and very openly so pretty much since then, and have done the whole medical, social, legal transition bit over the last 10 years. And I was really excited to be able to do this project, because I feel very drawn to making sure that our youth in rural places, and particularly in Southern Oregon, because that's like my heart, like where my people are all from, know that there is a wider world of support and a wider world of options, and that there are others who came before them that got out and did things with their life and are happy and well adjusted, because that's not the narrative that we're told often. So happy to be here and to share. And I don't know very many people, so I'm just going to pick a random person. Hopefully they haven't been picked yet. Desiree?
I already went.
Oh, damn. I'm horrible. Who hasn't gone?
Aaron hasn't gone, and Andrew hasn't gone, and myself. Anyone want to go?
Yeah.
Anybody?
I'll take space. The table is a white male.
Thank you for saving me. I didn't know who was going to.
Yeah. So I'm Andrew Decker. Like Nicole said, I'm an individual family therapist in Medford. I grew up in Roseburg, Oregon, which is, to my best knowledge, the indigenous lands of the Powder Creek Band of the Umpqua tribe. So shout out to them, and I'm sure other tribes and other peoples that were forgotten or intentionally forgotten. So I grew up there, got my associates in Roseburg. I went up to Portland State and got my psychology degree there. They did not want me for their master's program for some reason. So I ended up in the Lewis and Clark, which is a social justice-based program. Got my master's in marriage, couples, and family therapy. While we were there in the first class, the instructor who ended up being my supervisor said, actually she challenged the class and said, if y'all are not open to working in a rural area, are you actually being socially just, and are you actually keeping intersectionality and poverty in mind, or are you just being convenient? And that really struck a chord with me. I think I was offended at first because why not? Because I'm so there you go.
Andrew, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your audio is a little bit blocky, and I just don't
Sure.
want to miss any important stuff that you're saying.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry. So anyway, in the first class, we were challenged by the instructor who became my supervisor. And she said, if y'all are not open to working in a rural area, are you actually being socially just, or are you just being convenient? And that really struck a chord with me. And having grown up in Roseburg, I was like Roseburg needed people, like rural areas need like good high-tech therapists, which is why I ended up applying for jobs. I'm so happy I joined Kairos. Kairos is just this organization with it's incredible. In terms of how I identified as a gay man for most of my life growing up. Assigned male at birth. When I was going through my undergrad, I was like, something's a little weird. Like when I say man, like it doesn't really fit, but I'm not a woman, I'm not a trans woman, I don't really identify as agender. I knew something was up. I also realized that gay also didn't really fit for me either. And so my sexual identity is currently queer. For me, it's kind of like, I want people to know that I'm not cisgender or heterosexual, but beyond that, I don't think it's anyone's business. Going through Lewis and Clark, I realized that I actually identify as non-binary, as a non-binary person. Demigender doesn't really work for me. Demi-man doesn't really work. I tried out he and they pronouns for a while, but I felt like when I told people I used they pronouns, they would use it exclusively, and I felt like they treated me differently in a way that didn't really resonate with me, so I just tell people I use he, him, his. And honestly, it's a conversation I've probably had with like maybe 2 or 3 individuals before, so it's also kind of a coming out story here, so it's kind of fun. But currently identify as non-binary, and just like man just doesn't fit for me, but everything else doesn't really fit either, so I like that non-binary just is a large umbrella, which is like, you don't need to know anything else. So that's my story. So
Thank
we're gonna go, I'm gonna tag Aaron.
Okay. Can everybody see and hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. I can't tell because of what my screen's doing. I'm not very good with technologies. So hi everyone, I am Aaron, and I use they, them pronouns, which is actually fairly new to me. I identify as genderqueer, also somewhat new to me. I grew up in kind of starting out in rural Montana and then jumping over to the suburbs of Portland for the rest of my adolescent years, and then have moved around quite a bit in my adulthood, and somehow I ended up back here in Portland for the last 5 years. In my journey through figuring out my identity, both sexually, which is queer, and gender, which is genderqueer, was very slow and took a lot of time because of essentially kind of how I grew up was amongst Jehovah's Witnesses. That was something that I left when I was about 23. And so with my upbringing and just kind of my understanding of the world was a bit narrow and sheltered, and I wasn't really sure how to go out and seek outside sources or therapies or anything like that. So I just went with it, and I got my information through some community and friends and whatnot. And I came out as gay at one point when I was about 21, 22. I came out to my family when I was about 23. And then there was a that I went through a period of time like that. I'm assigned female at birth, and I identified as a dyke, which at the time, like, that was the closest thing that I could think of that fit me really well. And I went that way for a long time, and then somewhere when I moved to the Bay Area, and I was going to my undergraduate at Mills College, which is an all-women's institute for undergrad. Remarkably enough, in my senior year, I was getting a lot of new information and meeting a lot of new folks and widening my perspective quite a bit and understanding like trans folks, and that being like an option for somebody, you know, to be able to go through hormone therapy and things of that nature. And I had an epiphany, and I was like, oh my God, I'm a dude. And so I went on hormones, and I did that for about 6 years. And I have my own kind of personal journey with all of that. At some point, kind of towards the end of that, I was kind of starting to realize that it's not that I see myself in the world as a man or want to be seen as a man. And oftentimes a cis man was just blanketed. And so I went off of hormones reluctantly. And it took me a minute to get to the point of realizing that I just identify as genderqueer, somewhat fluid on the spectrum, you know, a little bit more masculine of center for me, but definitely kind of somewhere in the middle. So yeah, that's my story so far. I think I covered everything.
Thanks, Erin. I just want to let everybody know too, share as little or as much as you want. We're not pushing forth the agenda of the questions. So just stay with what feels good and what feels, you know, authentic in the conversation. Yeah, I appreciate everyone. It's so nice to see some of your faces that I don't see anymore. It's making me so happy. Trying to stay focused on this, but loving all of you so much. And so grateful that you're here. So I guess I'm last, everyone else is gone. Okay, well, I'm a pretty sissy, cisgender lady. I'm pretty deep in my femininity, so that's a thing for me. And I do identify as queer. I don't only identify as queer, but I also don't have really rigid identities that I go with. Because I'm constantly kind of chewing on it. It seems like a lot of people are moving through those things in different ways themselves too. I started out, when I first started feeling things that were, you know, not for heterosexual men solely, was around age 10. I was living in Louisiana. I didn't really have any concept of gay or bi, definitely not of trans identities at that point in time, like circa 1995 in the South. So but I've always had strong feelings and questions. When Connor and I were in high school together, I was very comfortable in my straight ally position. I felt comfortable being an ally, but not admitting my own sexual orientation, even to myself at that point. But it did really come up for me a lot when I was around 20. And so at age 20, my feelings, my romantic and emotional and physical feelings for women really started taking effect in my life. And so I finally admitted to myself, and then I admitted to all of my close friends, and all of them said, oh yeah, not surprised about you. And yeah, it's been a little bit of an interesting journey. The time in my life when I met Erin, I was identifying as a lesbian very rigidly, was in a same-sex relationship and did not foresee myself going back to the cis-het man world of love and relationships. But that has since changed. It's been 4 years since that relationship ended, and I'm now 2 years into a relationship with a queer man as well. Bisexual is starting to feel very limiting as a label, because as I've grown and evolved, I've realized that my attraction for human beings is not about them being a man or a woman, and it's really individual. And I also just wanted to name that one of the eye-opening experiences for me in realizing that my sexuality is more broad than the actual binary was when Sophia and I went to visit Connor years ago. Gosh, must be like 8 or 9. My daughter was really little. And Connor had the Body Alchemy book in the bathroom. And that was an amazing time for me to sit with that book and to appreciate the beauty of the human body in all the ways that it comes and changes and everything. So I was like, damn, there's some hot people in this book and they're not cis. So I don't know if bisexual is what I am. Definitely queer. I don't fully understand all the terms, just to be honest. I read up on it, but there's so many. Pan, sapia, like, I don't know. There's a lot, but yeah, so that's where I'm at with that. Yeah, and then I think from here we want to move into discussing, again, whatever is little or as much as you want to share about some memories or obstacles maybe that you experienced in coming to terms with your identity. If anyone wants to check in the chat box, I copied and pasted the kind of general list of questions that I had sent out in the email. So prompts if that helps. Yeah, maybe discussing obstacles that you've had, and if it leads right on into you finding your resilience, that will be the next question. We don't have to have everybody answer one and then the other. So however it really flows naturally. And I also just want to put out there that I think for today would be preferable that we tread lightly in trauma, just so that this is going to be easier to share with more people. So don't feel like you can't refer to trauma, but let's just maybe be a little mindful about the word choices and the images that we're painting, I guess. So does anyone feel called to start sharing on that?
I can start. Folks
Thank
want.
you.
Yeah. Someone's got to start. So this is like the question about some of like the hardships or struggles, that kind of thing. Yeah, I definitely understand the want to tread a little bit lightly on that, and I will do my very best to not paint too traumatic a picture for everyone. But I grew up in the Rogue Valley in the early aughts. Like, I was in high school, and it's very, I mean, it's, a lot of people from rural areas understand like sort of how gender and sexuality is policed and enforced by like the larger community, be that verbally or physically or what have you. It's just not safe to be different or to try and break away from what's expected of you at all. And I think a lot of people that live in small towns and have like a religious background experience that. I certainly have a pretty strict religious background. I went to what was described at the time as a Southern Baptist private school, from kindergarten through the end of 7th grade, when they finally kicked me out, thank God. That formed a lot of my early thoughts and feelings about a lot of different things, because that was what I was immersed in all the time, because it was religious school, 5 days a week, and then also church 2 or 3 times a week. And I like to make a light joke that they really tried, like Christianity really tried to like get me in there, and they just couldn't quite get a grasp on me. And I joke it's because, being a sort of like defiant, fiery person, I just didn't let I wouldn't let them activate those guilt and shame buttons the way they wanted to. And they would try and press them, and maybe that I internalized a lot of it, and that's some things I've had to work out as an adult. But at least outwardly, I was sort of like, I don't know what you're trying to do, bro, but it's not working. I'm gonna do whatever I want. And this led to a lot of strife and some really hard times in my family, because I just, I would not submit or comply to the wishes of my mother, who is a very strict and religious person. So, you know, as you can imagine, that caused a lot of struggle and strife in our life, and it was a very, you know, tense time all through my upbringing. And my mother is a challenging figure, and I won't get too into that because no one needs to know that. But I will say that there were like really kind of like hallmark moments in my adolescence, and one of them is like, and I remember so clearly because I was in high school during the 2000 election, the Bush, or no, sorry, it would have been 2004 election, the Bush-Kerry election. And my little friends and I, we were all very politically active. We're like, yes. And we went down to like the Democratic office, and they gave us rainbow signs, and we were all very excited to go stand on the side of the road and like hold up our little signs. And, you know, just being visibly sort of gay looking people holding rainbow signs on the side of the road in Medford was enough for us to get jumped and pretty seriously injured. And I don't need to go into details about that, but I will say that, like, you know, when I got home, basically my family was like, well, you caused it. It was your fault. You were antagonizing the people of the town, and that was why you got attacked. And you sort of like, oh, wow, like you really don't give a shit about like what happens to me, and you will rearrange this narrative to fit whatever is happening for you. So, you know, I became very active in the GSA in high school, and I became very active in being a very vocal opponent to the war that was happening, which also didn't make me very popular in the hometown. But I just refused to like just do the things that we were supposed to. And I think that was and I look back on high school, it was a kind of lonely situation. Like, you just don't really have people that are like you. I felt like I was the only one of, like, at the time, you know, masculine kind of dyke creature. There were lots of like out gay boys, but there were not a lot of like out masculine presenting gay women folk, or even like gender queer people. But it's funny that we're on this panel where like people are trying to give more resources to queer youth in Rogue Valley, and that's so amazing. And it reminded me of one of the things that was a saving grace during that time, which was a group called Not Straight, Not Sure, which was a group that was run by a therapist, and she would do all the screening and try to make sure everybody was safe, because we had to have the meeting in secret because people would get followed or harassed, or their parents would find out, and then they would have to move the group somewhere else. So it was a lot of like, you know, kind of hide and seek with trying to just have support and have like somebody like-minded enough to be able to provide support. So I find that I'm so glad that there's maybe more resources being flooded into our small towns, because they're definitely needed. So yeah, I would say, like, for me, the biggest thing is religious nonsense, and just not getting down with that, and kind of finding that is a big barrier. And then just like cultural stuff, you know, like people just not being accepting or open-minded, or even, I didn't even have any gay people around me. Like, there were no gay people in our family or I was the only one. So like by the time I got to Portland, I was like, oh, other gay people exist. Like, in the world, you can see them. What? You know? So, yes, that was sort of my experience, and I have decided to, in a lot of ways, take that trauma and run with it and be like, hey, this is just something that happened to me, and it didn't define who I was, but it defined what I wasn't going to be or will allow to happen as much as possible to other people. So I'm happy that we're all here and sharing our stories. So I will check.
Thanks, Connor. I also want to clarify, just because this is geared towards the queer youth, that I was around for that incident that Connor's referring to, and it was the toxic masculinity wrestling team attack is what it was. So they were students at the school, and they were defended by their wrestling coach, who was being promoted to principal of the school.
Yep. And like, you know, the school told us that, oh, it happened after school, so it's a police issue, and the police were like, we're not touching it. So they just like walked away. With, you know,
I almost got expelled for screaming at the principal and helping him out.
Yeah, it was.
We need to listen to the straight person.
Right. Oh, it's a tough time.
Yeah, I just wanted to name that, especially, you know, because of the things that go on in schools.
Yeah, sure.
So I wish I had written a letter to the newspaper at that time. I think we were all hurting a lot and pretty scared and frustrated, and it was very overwhelming when we didn't get any support from the adults in our lives. And now that I'm older, I realize that we could have taken that much further and we could have held them accountable. We just didn't know the power that we had. So
well, we knew that like if we continued the situation, there was a potential that it could escalate again, and if they didn't defend us the first time, what was going to happen the next time, you know?
Yeah.
So definitely, yeah. And those things happen all the time, and the adults don't do the right things, and it, you know, it leads to just being like, you know, a traumatic experience in multiple people's lives that never got any sort of justice, you know?
I know you still struggle with that, Connor.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Talkative me is going to be a step backy today, so don't make me squirm trying to fill the silences.
I can go.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in rural Southern Oregon in the Applegate Valley, halfway between Rouge and Applegate. And I went to elementary school at Applegate Elementary. I went to middle school and high school at St. Mary's in Medford. And then I went to college at SOU in Ashland. And I don't think I started to have conversations with myself about how I felt in terms of attraction to other people until I was probably 13 or 14. But I was in the midst of a long period in my childhood of abuse and trauma, and I was mostly just focused on trying to survive from day to day, and was feeling really overwhelmed by how to even navigate that conversation in my head of who I was attracted to and whether I was legitimate. Some days I was attracted to men, some days I was attracted to women, and I didn't know what that meant about me, and I felt like I wasn't a real person, or didn't have a real attraction to share in terms of sexual orientation until I had a relationship. So I didn't say anything. And I went to a very Catholic, in many ways very conservative high school, where many people were very openly disdainful of queer people, and people would get away with saying and doing things that were extremely offensive and violent. There was one person who would say really inflammatory things, like he would say, "When I become president, I'm going to shoot all the homosexuals and enslave the Jews." Or make comments about like it's just unacceptable and they shouldn't be allowed to sodomize each other and that should be illegal. And it made it a really difficult place to be open about anything, especially when the teachers would not interrupt him and he would not get in trouble. And it wasn't entirely like that, but a lot of the experiences of my peers who went to other high schools faced similar things. There were groups at local high schools. I think it was North. There was a group that called themselves RAMS, Rage Against Minorities. And they would attack queer youth and youth of color. And it was generally a really nerve-wracking time to try to be open about anything. So when I graduated, it was only then, and that was the point that the abuse and the trauma had stopped, that I told anyone anything about my feelings. I told two friends the summer after I graduated, and I said, "I think I'm not straight." And they were really accepting. But then I went to college and all of my friends left. And I felt very alone, and I went running back into the closet and I didn't say anything for years. And tried to socialize and date in straight cis circles, and that was definitely not working. And I had a very intuitive twin who I think was very intentional in introducing me to people who were associated with the Queer Resource Center at Southern Oregon University. And that's when I really started, that was my third year in college, that I started to examine that a little bit more and feel more comfortable about exploring my attractions and being open. But in a community, Oregon is often stereotyped as this very open, liberal place. That really is only in very, in my experience, metropolitan areas and bigger cities. And it's not very easy to access in places like Southern Oregon. And so even in the time that I was starting to come out and I was becoming active with organizations at the university in terms of student government and the Gender Sexuality Alliance, the Gender Sexuality and Women's Studies program, I found it extremely hard to be open about those things outside of the university. I never talked about my personal life and my job. Many of my friends I did not share things with. I was really nervous about being judged and was really overwhelmed and tired. It's hard to be open in particular ways in a place like that. I stopped putting stickers on my car because I was really tired of being harassed and tailgated, flipped off and yelled at. Somebody wrote, "I hate you" on my bumper at one point. So the youth experience for me was in some ways liberating to be able to start to find a community at the university. In some ways felt like it happened really late. I didn't get the experience of being able to explore things in my adolescence, even in terms of just dating, just being able to have close relationships with people in that way. And even now, I'm still scared to be open about particular things depending on where I'm at. And I don't generally use my pronouns when I'm home in Southern Oregon because I find it more difficult and it's not something I'm ready to share with some people down there. And it feels like a safer environment for me to use those up here working at the University of Oregon. So I think that the other thing that really strikes me in terms of my experience is that it was one thing to engage in a community of people at the university and find acceptance there, but also be struggling to be a part of a family with whom my immediate family was really supportive. But to have connections beyond that I was always really nervous about. I was outed to my dad's family, who are Greek and they live in Tanzania, by Google, which was a weird experience. I made a video for Basic Rights Oregon about marriage equality, and my uncle found it by doing a Google search of our family name. And he found that video and proceeded to write me a 5-page letter on all of the reasons why he thought I was wrong. At the time, I think I was maybe 21. I was still really young. And I got that message 2 weeks before I was supposed to go visit some of that family. And it said everything from like, your girlfriend's corrupted you, you're not a real Greek person because you're like this, you're a shame on our family, your parents let you turn out like this, they failed as your parents, all kinds of really devastating things that made me feel like that section of my family I was just no longer connected to. The good thing was that I told my parents, I'm not going to go see this family unless I know that it's safe for me to do so. And they sent a blanket email to that side of the family, with the exception of my grandma, by my request, saying, this is our child. We love Sophia. We accept them. And if you don't, they're not going to visit you. And everyone was mostly supportive. Some of them still came from this perspective of this really conservative Greek of like, that's fine, we accept you, we just don't talk about those things. We should just say they can talk about their personal lives all they want, they just don't talk about mine. But it was amazing to see the ones who were really supportive be supportive. That's all that comes to mind right now.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
First, I want to shout out to Sophia. Thanks for sharing that story. It's far more intense than anything I've ever gone through, so can't even imagine. But so I grew up in Roseburg, which is rural Oregon. If you grew up in Roseburg, it's not rural, but if you're from anywhere else, it's like bumfuck nowhere. So it's in the middle of the binary, middle of the spectrum. But I was bullied pretty much straight out of the gate the second I entered public school, which was K through 12. Either at daycare or at school, boys, girls, people that were in between but weren't out. Like I was pretty much bullied by pretty much everything. I was kind of like the gentle giant sort. Like I was literally 6'2" when I was 12 years old. Like I was always tall right out of the gate, and people made fun of me for it. And the narrative that I got from my parents was always walk away. Like be the better man, always walk away. Be the better man, always walk away. And so I wouldn't stand up for myself. And, well, it's a really valuable skill when you're like in the workplace and you don't want to deal with someone being an asshole. It doesn't really work when you are very sensitive and empathetic for people and you end up internalizing it. So that really sucked. So anyway, I was bullied a lot. In junior high, I started looking up gay porn, not making connection that there was something about me. I was just like, this sounds like fun. But because I was bullied so much, people were like, are you gay? Are you gay? Are you the F word? You know, da, 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 da. It's like I was always, maybe not in like fight or flight mode, but I was always activated. And I didn't really have the freedom to self-reflect and to really think about who am I attracted to, all that stuff. I finally accepted it in myself probably like the summer after 8th grade. I came out to my best friend over email, so it really dates me, over Gmail, saying, I'm gay, thank you so much for supporting me. And she was super great and she was awesome. She's like, I always knew. I'm like, I fucking knew you were gonna say that. I hate that sentence, but oh my God. But you know, thanks for the support. Didn't come out to my parents because I wasn't ready. Kind of slowly started coming out to people at school on my own terms. One day I was emailing her again in Gmail. Went, took a shower, came back. My mom was on the computer saying we need to have a conversation. She snooped for good reason, but she snooped. Basically outed me, and the end of the conversation ended with, this is probably just a phase. Don't go telling anyone anything. Like it might change. And for me, later in life, she told me, she's like, I don't want you to identify as something being in rural Oregon that could put your life in danger. But the message I got was, I don't believe you, and you're not old enough to make the decision for yourself. So that really sucked. I came out to, after that, I decided that I was officially like out, but to the extent of if anyone asks, I'll be honest. So that's kind of the stance I took. There's no big parade, there's no big poster, no rainbow flag, nothing like that. And shockingly, all the bullying that really got to me before it's kind of stopped. I'd be like, you're a fag. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, and they walk away. So I was like, damn, if I would have known this would have worked, I would have done it so much sooner. But it was still hard. Eventually came out to my dad. That was a shockingly positive experience for everyone involved. Me and my mom and my dad included thought that he was not going to handle it very well if his only son came out as gay, and he ended up being surprisingly cool with it. So that was really awesome. High school was a bit of a mixed bag. We didn't have a GSA until my senior year. And the GSA was run by one of my exes, so that wasn't happening. But my only sense of community was pretty much people that I was dating. I officially came out 15, and I was apparently a thirsty girl. I dated pretty much every openly gay man I could have got my hands on in high school, but that was really the only access I had to queerness and queer people, aside from like, which is a great representation for us. But so I always really felt alone. None of my friends identified as queer or trans or anything like that at the time. Where was I going with that? I don't know. Oopsie. Ah, shit, I was going somewhere. But later in life, all of my best friends that I'm still in contact with have slowly started coming out. My best friend of all time identifies, she doesn't use the word out loud, but she identifies as gay. Two of my best friends identify as asexual, one of which is non-binary. And it's like, shit, like, if y'all would have done this earlier, this would have been so much easier. But, oh, mixed bag. So, I had a moment in 9th grade where I was just talking to I was extremely depressed. I was suicidal, but didn't realize it. I was talking to the one teacher that really got me. And some asshole just started being like, aren't your parents disappointed in you? Like, don't your parents want to get rid of you? If I was your parent, I'd want to kill you. Like, just awful, awful, awful things right in front of the teacher. And the teacher's like, get the hell out. Like, absolutely not. Get out, get out, get out. And I was just standing there. And for those of us in the field, like, I was completely like catatonic. Like, nothing was phasing me. I just felt bad, depressed. She said, I am so sorry for that happened. I am so sorry. She was taking the blame. And for that was probably the first moment I realized that the world is kind of fucked up. Like, I knew that homophobia was real and it was broken and wrong. That was the first time that I realized that it doesn't need to be wrong. Like, it's a bad thing that this is a real systemic issue. So she was absolutely fabulous. She ended up reporting me for being suicidal, so whoopsie, but it was a good thing. Later on, I had a teacher, an English teacher, say, okay, I want everyone to do a journal, talk about whatever you want. I ended up writing about relationship problems, which obviously included men. And the next day he said to the class, I do not like gay people. I do not want to read that. I don't want to hear about it. And for whatever reason, I didn't make it an issue. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't even think about telling the administration of the school. I was just like, okay, that's my role as a student, is to not, make waves. So I'm not going to do that. Looking back, that was really awful. Like, it's one of the most blatant misuses of power I've ever seen, which granted, I'm also a white person, so there you go. Looking back, I think that I had a really unusually positive experience despite all those things. And having gone through grad school, I'm also aware that at the time I identified as male, I'm assigned male at birth, I'm white, able-bodied, able-minded. Like, I had a really, really, really easy time compared to a lot of other people. And while I think a lot of people, when I tell a lot of people my coming out story and stuff like that, they're like, wow, you're so brave. You did that at 15. And I was like, looking back now, it's like, I really had nothing working against me. And I just had the blindness of a 16-year-old, 15-year-old at the time. But I found out later on in life, I think it was before I went to high school, but there was what we call fag drag, which is where someone is tied to a truck and then pulled. I found that happened. I'm not sure which year it was, but it happened in Roseburg. So that was kind of shocking. I'm glad I learned about it later in life than when I was at that school, but that was really hard. I'd say in terms of resilience and all of that, I was blessed with a lot of it, but I think I also took the stance of, this is easier if I'm not lying. And I realized later on in life, honesty is my most important value. So I think a lot of it came from that. And having connection with the friends that I do now, and the friends I had at the time, probably got me through everything. But nowadays, my parents are super great. I realized that my mom was living in San Francisco in the 1980s. So given that she's working in the medical system, she saw what the AIDS crisis did to people both queer and not queer. And her concerns were safety, and her concerns were, I want to make sure my son is not attacked and murdered. So I understand her concerns back then. It still sucked, but I found out later in life that she also attended PFLAG meetings, and she read books, and she really educated herself. So go mom, she's awesome. My dad is probably the biggest ally I could ever hope for. He's 73 years old. He would march with me in a parade. He said if I ever did drag, he'd be in the front row. I'm like, that's not my thing, but thank you anyway. And he's a sign maker for the local VA, Veterans Association in Roseburg. And someone came to him saying, I want you to make this sticker. It was something homophobic, like Godspeed gays or whatever. And instead of just saying, no, that's not my job, he said, no, I will not do that. That's wrong. These people are born this way, which, whatever, but for him it was huge. But he stood up and defended not me, but like all queer people. And I heard that story, and that was probably like the biggest moment of like, my dad has my back, and he will always have my back. So I would say most of my resilience comes from my friends and my family, and really my dad, and he was just incredible. And yeah, 0 community aside from the people I was dating at the time. So that really sucked, but now I have the internet and I have friends. So yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. Oh, the thing I copied and pasted went away because I had to rejoin the group. That's why it's
I can recopy it for you.
I got it. Thank you, though. There.
Oh, perfect.
Sorry, I gave you that reference and it wasn't existing for you. Does anyone else feel like they want to build? And feel free to ask questions or reflect similar or different experiences as well. Open flow.
I will. You know, for the longest time, prepping for this discussion, I was really hesitant to take up any space, especially when it comes to this question, just out of recognition of what I consider relative privilege. I was born and raised in Ashland in the late 90s and early 2000s. You know, generally considered a pretty queer-friendly town, although as somebody who did not come out till after I left Ashland, I can't personally attest to that. The biggest struggle, well, I mean, there were a few struggles. The biggest struggle for me at a younger age was that there was no visibility of non-binary sexuality or identities whatsoever. So I think I heard the word bisexual for the first time when I was maybe 14 years old, which coincidentally was around the age I first started being attracted to women. But at the same time, I got into a relationship with the cis man who has ended up being my life partner. So I really hid behind that passing privilege for many, many years because I was terrified. You know, I heard the experiences of others. I saw what it could entail. And also I just had a general fear of committing to any identity. I think as a biracial person, I've lived my life at the intersection of 2 identities, and the idea of bringing yet another one into question just felt exhausting and like too much. Then as I got older, I went off to college and ended up at a private Catholic school. And while I was there, I was still pretty afraid to tell anybody. I had one really close friend, and it was just irrationally, in hindsight, she's a wonderful and accepting person, but irrationally terrified that if I told her about my attraction to women and all people, that she, you know, would abandon me, which, you know, when you're 18 years old and in this brand new place, that's scary enough. That was scary enough to make me clam up. Then towards the end of my time at that university, in my last 2 years, a big battle started between the student body and the president of the university and the, I forget what they were called, but essentially the council of priests who ran things there. They outright refused to include sexual orientation or gender identity in the school's non-discrimination agreement. They said informally, you know, we will not discriminate against the LGBTQ plus population, but they refused to codify it, citing religious needs. And that fight went on for a good 1.5 years, 2 years. And, you know, that really cemented my fear of telling anybody about who I really was, because here I was at a giant institution who I'm paying a lot of money to, and they won't even, you know, guarantee to protect me or even to not discriminate actively against me themselves. So there were a lot of things in my life that kept me afraid. And in terms of things that I think could be helpful to queer youth and things that meant a great deal to me, returning back here, intentionally surrounding myself with people who held a variety of different values, but a lot of whom were queer and a lot of whom were, you know, really politically liberal, really accepting, that made it finally safe. And it got to a point where the desire to commit, you know, the desire to hide behind my straight passing privilege was not any strong, was no longer stronger than the desire to be who I really was. So that's how it came about for me.
Thank you, Elise. I can go next. I feel like I can relate to a lot what Lisa's going through with like passing privilege. So I grew up in a very privileged lifestyle as a cisgender man, and I was also very socialized into homophobic, transphobic, and racism values. And so I grew up, like I said, in rural township called Whitmore Lake. Our neighbors were a half a mile away from each other. The nearest store was 30-minute drive, and in order to get to school, it was an hour bus ride. And so I didn't have a lot of community or a lot of connections. And so the messages that I received were directly from the family, who were not the best role models. And so for a very long time, I didn't have language for my feelings. And so the language I identified with was being a straight male for many, many, many years. And it wasn't until I was about 14 or 15 years old when I accessed the online community and started really getting into video gaming. So I play a lot of video games online, and I encountered a community there who I still stay connected with across the world, even though I've never had the chance to meet them. And so they were the kind of the ones that provide different language. And that's when I started realizing that being a straight male was not my identity, and I didn't want it to be my identity, and actually being gay is who I was. And so once I identified with that, I still clung on to the passing privilege and fear of what would happen if I came out. Around that time too is when I was seeing a lot more homophobic comments being made from the family. One that still sticks with me today was when I was sitting around a dinner table and my uncle and my father were talking, and my uncle said, "What would you do if when your sons came out gay?" And my father laughed and says, "I would just get rid of them." And so from that point onwards, I knew it wasn't safe. I didn't feel safe. And I still tried to convince myself that I was straight. And I really held internal homophobic ideas about myself. So once I turned 18, 19 years old, I actually met my partner playing World of Warcraft online. He lived in Reading. And so I got enough money and flew him over to come meet me for a month. And we spent the month together. And of course, we still passed as friends, that he was just coming to meet me. But we really connected well, and I knew that I needed to get out of the place that I was at and try something different. So with about $1,000 to my name, no job history, very sheltered life, never had to deal with any problems on my own, I flew to Ashland, Oregon, and that's where I settled. And so for the next 5-6 years, I dealt with a lot of shame and guilt, because once I moved out here, I started coming out and I started trying to be who I wanted to be, but also still hiding my identities from my parents and my family. And so for a very long time, whenever they would come to visit, it would be like changing the whole apartment to be very straight passing, trying to sleep in a different room than my partner, not trying to talk about it, which really was painful and really not the way I wanted to live. And so after I joined the MSW program, and actually after we had our first queer caucus and having connection, I found my chosen family. And so having the family support from both the cohort I was in, but also the online community that I had, I decided to come out. And so really my coming out story is happening now. It's still a battle. I went back in Christmas to see my family for the first time as an out gay man. And I had a lot of ups and downs. I found a lot of family support from cousins who I grew close to, and I didn't think they would be supportive, and they were my best friends, and they wanted to hear about Matt and talk about him, and were really excited. And then I had other family members who couldn't change their wording, and so they called him roommates or a friend, and they couldn't grapple with that. And then I actually encountered my great aunt, and that ended in an explosion of a fight about how I was destroying the family, and how my role as a man is to get married and settle down and be the head of the household and have children, and that is not who I am or who I don't want to be. And so I left feeling very disconnected and very lonely. And I was talking to a friend about it who gave me really good language that I kind of resonated with. Like, the more I come out, the more I feel disconnected from the biological family, and the more lonely that feels. But at the same time, I find resilience from my friends online, but also the people I've met here. And so while it's painful, I still name and recognize that I have a lot of privilege, because I have a lot of amazing people and a lot of settings here that make me feel safe and comfortable. But right now, my coming out story is happening, and I feel like every day I'm waking up and coming out, and it's safe, it's unsafe, it's different feelings, and it's a lot to kind of process and go through. So it's kind of my story.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna follow you, I think. Just feeling resonance with this coming out, this being exploring, and as I kind of shared before, questioning, which I just kind of hate that term because I think I've like known myself a really long time. And I think I struggle more with labels and yeah, also struggle with like claiming a marginalized identity when I have a lot of privilege and am cisgendered, and just have a lot of yeah, I grew up in the suburbs, so not totally rural, but it was really a culture of conformity, and I don't think I knew a single gay or lesbian or trans person. I don't remember any kind of alliance of any kind in my school. And being in a primarily white community, I also just struggled with like fitting in, and my, you know, not even knowing I was struggling with it, but all my friends, you know, being white, and I really just wanted to have stringy blonde hair, and you know, and I was like chubby, and so there's like insecurities, just other aspects that I was grappling with, and recognizing that I was attracted to my friends, you know, or girls, or at a young age, probably also around 10, and just being like, nope, that's not okay, you know, and just really recognizing how much I was seeking belonging, and already feeling different. And so I think, yeah, through high school that got pushed down. In college, I was like, yeah, cool, this is cool. But I don't like, there was like something really deep seated that just I never gave myself permission to do that. And also ended up meeting a man I was with, like my first quarter of college. And that ended up, I was in that relationship 12 years and had a child with him. And so there was just a way that I didn't have the opportunity. And so now I'm like 35 and questioning. And also just like moving into like, yeah, I am attracted to women. Yes, you know, the sexual encounters I've had with women and men are like, and then just blowing that apart, and like, actually, I don't even, yeah, there's all the possibilities, and giving myself permission and not yeah, getting bogged down by what I am or not am not. So and then also, yeah, struggling with Catholic upbringing and the norms that come with that, and just like how that squashes pieces of how that squashed pieces of myself. So coming into, and I think, yeah, the like resilience and what's made that really possible is having more humans in my life to just be like, yeah, you're okay, and yeah, you can be whatever you want, and that being really powerful and transformative. That's me.
Okay.
My daughter's making lunch right here, but I will speak on this soon.
Okay. I'll go ahead and fill the silence in the meantime because I haven't gone yet. And as Nicole knows, I'm a little bit of a windbag, so you've got plenty of time. And so, as I had mentioned when we were introducing ourselves, I grew up in a Jehovah's Witness background, which in of itself is almost like being in a small town atmosphere. I mean, the ways in which they function are very like, I don't know, circa 1950s traditional values, gender roles, you name it, very strong, and a very, very cohesive and insulated community. So along with that, you know, kind of growing up in small part in rural Montana, and then even here, I was in kind of the Hillsboro, Aloha area, which, you know, and this was, I mean, I kind of grew up in the 80s and 90s, so there really wasn't a lot of representation, even externally, you know, in media or in the small ways in which I interacted within society, to kind of really show the potential spectrum of individuals that a human can be, and it made it difficult for me navigating my my identity in terms of, you know, who I'm attracted to, my sexuality. I think was the first thing that I really started to kind of explore in any way, shape, or form, and that was pretty late in the game. I mean, I really held back a lot, and I tended to be I tended to have internalized a lot of the values and ideas of my upbringing, which definitely included pretty much probably all of the isms that you can possibly imagine. And I remember even in high school, then I had a friend who I was kind of vaguely friends with. We couldn't make friends for real outside of our religious community, so it became kind of an interesting thing. I saw him at school, but he was gay. I didn't know it, and I remember at one point telling him that how I made some really homophobic statement about how much of an abnormality it was, and how people chose to be that way because that's what I had been taught. And, you know, at the time, I remember there was, when I was in Montana, there was one gay man. He was kind of entitled the town gay, like that's what everybody knew him as, in terms of representation of assigned female folks, you know, being gay. There was almost nothing that I knew of. There was Ellen DeGeneres, you know, at one point in the 90s, and I remember right around graduation time, maybe just after, just before, when she came out to the world, and the backlash that she received because of it. And when Matthew Shepard happened, and that was right around the time that I was graduating high school, and that was, you know, and in my early 20s, I got to see, you know, I got to see Boys Don't Cry, which was one of the first movies that there was a centralization around being being gay, or being, even in this particular sense, being gender variant, and trying to deal with that, and it was terrifying. So aside of having, and I would say it was mostly the religious upbringing that did a lot of really suppressing any kind of individuality at all anyway. And being kind of in the suburbs in my adolescence, I was the weird, like overly butch girl in amongst all of my friends, you know, and I couldn't figure out how to conform. It was like Desiree was mentioning, in kind of suburbia, there was like this, it's a lifestyle of conformity. And that was definitely what I saw in my congregation of people, which was mostly all I was around, and even in school to an extent. And so I had a lot of that. I think that one of my best resources when I was young, when I found a lot of resilience was definitely not in my family because they did not do well with it at all. But I found a couple of friends, even within the religion, who were both gay, and they were trying to come to grips with that as well. And we all confided in one another, and we built a friendship from this shared identity and this shared trial that we were going through, trying to figure ourselves out and um, trying to reconcile that with our faith at the time, which was strong, and we had been born into it, and we didn't know anything else. And um, I kind of adopted them as my family, and I've kind of done that ever since. There have been a number of folks, and community has been a major, they've been the pillars. They've been my family, the people who accept me as I am, and that I've learned so much from in terms of bravery and difference and a difference of perspective and their own resilience, getting accepted by their families sometimes to an extent. And around the time when I was in my undergrad, Nicole, you mentioned the Body Alchemy book. And I found that. I visited San Francisco because my partner at the time and I had just moved to Oakland for our start in college, and we went to, I get the name wrong, A Different Light bookstore, I think it was. I should know the name of it better than that. It's a pretty famous queer bookstore, and I found that book in there, and it was, I was instantly just in awe as I was looking through this, and I was suddenly like, this is an option. Like, this is a thing. This is this beautiful thing that exists, that people can get to express themselves and choose to be who and how they are. And it's not a scary thing. And it was probably one of the first times that I saw something that was in some kind of like in book form, in pictorial form, and really exposing a lot of vulnerability and a lot of anatomy and physicality and a lot of things that, folks who don't know are like, I don't understand. Like, so what is it? What's it like? And it kind of, it was a really gorgeous resource and just a way to open me up to possibilities. And that was back in 2004, I think 2003, 2004, something like that.
I was straight.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. And that kind of had started me on my journey then, to being, to understanding even just my gender and how I present myself, and going through, a journey that I went through, like I said, hormone therapy, and even though I stopped the hormone supplements, I'm glad that I did that, and it took me through the journey that I needed to come to this place. And it was a lot of leaps and jumps and whatnot. And I found over the years that probably the things that helped me the most was seeing an increased representation in movies or TV shows or things that gave a little bit of a normality. And I see that increasing at this point, which is really kind of incredible, because in a very insulated upbringing as I was, it would have been one of the only ways that I would have been able to see that that this isn't some weird abnormal you know, out there, those people, you know, kind of representation. I would have really loved to have that resource a little bit more so when I was growing up. And so I'm glad to see that it's out there now. I'm trying to think. Another thing. Nope, that's it. That's all I got. I was trying to think about something else in terms of resilience, but my mind just went blank. And so hopefully Nicole or somebody else is ready to talk.
Thanks, Erin. I'm just writing notes here for just kind of getting some themes. And one thing that I just want to plant a seed for is that we're discussing the Body Alchemy book and stuff. I think maybe at the end of this, we can all throw in some resource suggestions as far as like books and movies and artists go. We could put that in a written form at the end of this recording for youth, stuff that could be helpful that maybe they haven't found. Even though by and large they have a lot more access these days, youth do, to all kinds of stuff on the internet, and there's a lot more, you know, identity and queer movement progression.
Can I add one cool thing about a resource in Southern Oregon? So hiding hiding in plain sight in Grants Pass is the man who was Harvey Milk's photographer. And he is a wonderful human being, and I think it'd be a great to I would like to get in touch with him and see if he's would be willing to, I don't know, do some things for our youth in Southern Oregon as well. He's a super nice guy, and
cool.
he was there for all of the historic gay shit, and took all the pictures.
Oh yes, please let me know if we can connect with this person.
Yes.
That would be great. So yeah, everyone's shared a lot of really good stuff, and so I guess I feel like I want to be balanced in acknowledging my privilege as well. You know, I grew up as a white, mostly white, and definitely white passing person, white reality, and as a cisgendered female, passing privilege is something that I have a lot of. And my journey, you know, I keep thinking back on this topic that we've been discussing in some of our courses with, in our course on, you know, working social work with the LGBTQ plus population, is the concept of foreclosure. I foreclosed on my own sexual orientation a few times throughout my life. You know, I had those feelings early on, but I did think, like many of us here, it sounds like you think you're the only one, like you have this kind of like wrong screw in your head, and you can't imagine that anybody else out there in the world is messed up like this inside. So you don't tell anybody because you don't want to deal with how that might look. And I think as human beings, we all want to belong, right? Like, Desiree talked about wanting to belong, and that resonates a lot. And despite even all the years of passing and privilege, I've still never felt like I belonged fully anywhere, and it's really hard to do, especially as a teen. But I did start, I started experimenting with my friends pretty young, and my girlfriend specifically. And when I was 14, by the time I was 11, we had moved from Louisiana to Ashland, which is where I was actually born, but we had moved away when I was really young. And the summer between 7th and 8th grade for me, I hung out downtown on the plaza, and I hung out with a lot of older people. And I met a young woman who was 19. I must have been 13. And she was openly bisexual. And it was like, as soon as she told me that, I was obsessed with her. Just like, I wanted to, like, I fantasized about her and all this stuff. And so I came out that summer as being bi. And then by the time school started and I went back to school, even to Ashland Middle School at that point in time, was probably 2001 or so. It was still a really scary thing to think about being out. Like, there was like maybe one bisexual identified person and one guy who we all thought was gay, but he never said it. So it was like, even then it wasn't as open and common to have variations of gender and sexuality as I see now. But so I went back in the closet, and then when I was 15, I had my first like full-on sexual experience with another female who was a good friend of mine. We were intoxicated, and shit felt really weird the next day. And I realized that I wasn't actually attracted to her, and I realized that she was embarrassed about what we had done, and I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment about it. And it was so loaded for me, even without, I've had religious impacts in my life, but not really solid, consistent ones that where I never saw another side to it. Those influences are very pervasive in society, but my mother was never extremely religious, although she turned out to be surprisingly homophobic, which is another conversation, despite being an atheist feminist. But yeah, so that was when I went in, I think I went into foreclosure, and I told myself that, no, I'm not, that's not me, I'm not like that. I wouldn't feel so disgusted with myself and my friend after that experience if I was truly like that. And, so that's how I stuffed that into the hole and left it there and decided I was going full throttle, straight ally, holding signs with Connor. So it's been an interesting journey as well, because I will honestly say one of the things that has been a huge barrier for me in being able to really come to terms with my sexual orientation, specifically in the beginning, is that it can be really hard to be an inexperienced bisexual woman with a child and to have the opportunity to explore relationships with other non-hetero people. Particularly certain groups of lesbians can be extremely difficult to get into. And so by default, men were what it was. And then I got pregnant, and it was just like I was yearning to be with a woman for many years. And then it wasn't until I was 27, so yeah, it's like 5 years, 26, 27, yeah, that I reconnected with my my now ex-partner, who was someone who also we went to school with here in Southern Oregon, who was not outwardly gay at that point. But she didn't really care about the judgments of like, oh, always gonna go back to the D, you're just like, what do they call it? I don't know, there's a lot of labels and stuff, but
Has-been.
I think I'm thinking of on the other side of that, though. That's probably what people are calling me now behind my back. Although they don't know about my life. And polyamory and consensual non-monogamy can be next time's discussion. But so that was actually huge. That was a huge barrier for me to be able to find my identity and find my comfort in my queerness, and to feel like I could identify that way. And then once I did get into that relationship and I began feeling really passionate about my sexuality as far as being with a woman, it felt safe, it felt right, like sexually is absolutely my preference, just on a physical level. And then through that relationship, not because my partner was, she's not the type of lesbian who is discriminatory against anybody for anything too straight or too mainstream. But because she is a pretty solidly identified lesbian, she has a community of lesbian friends. And, with in some of those group settings, there's a lot of man-hating that does go on in those settings. Not with everybody, but it was something that I got, I was like, I finally got my ticket into the circle. And then it was like, there was a lot of pressure on me from people close to me to not ever be with a man again. And everybody, I believed, and everybody around me believed that I was definitely solidly lesbian. I had, when I kind of came out as having a boyfriend a couple years ago, I had people confronting me on my social media. I had people telling me like, oh, this guy's in for it because you're gay. And, you know, so that's probably the has-been phase that I think I'm walking through, for people who don't know me, or don't know me that well. Yeah, it's been, you know, it's always like the labels. I hear everybody talking here about language, labels. That shit has tripped me up so hard. And that is why this is Coffee with Queers, because yes, I respect that many people have historically, you know, triggering reactions to that term for very good reason. But in the newer sense of the word, the queer is all encompassing. And I can tell you like, hey, I'm family, and I don't have to tell you my entire sexual history, but you can trust that I'm queer, you know? So yeah, the labels are really, really, really troublesome. Yeah, and passing privilege is a really bittersweet thing. You know, some of you know, maybe all of you know, that I recently discovered I have a biological father I didn't know about, and some new ethnicities that are in the mix. And I actually just a couple weeks ago, I met my biological father and one of my new siblings, and they're very religious. So I can't remember what. It's a super religious one, Pentecostal. Strict religious Pentecostals. So, you know, I thought like, whoa, I'm not gonna present this. And then I felt really guilty because I have a straight presenting white cis male partner that I can hide behind, literally. And so I actually, in a moment of discussion with my new sister, who, by the way, like on her Facebook, her little caption says, "I love Jesus." I decided when our biological father went to nap in the middle of the day, he's also quite old, that I was going to come out to her. And so I did. And I hadn't been planning on it. And she was very accepting and loving about it, although she suggested that I don't share that with our father, biological father. Yeah, but anyway, so the coming out stuff is ongoing. I never thought I was going to be coming out to another religious group that is supposed to be my family at age 33. I thought I had done that. My father, who raised me, is Catholic. His family's Catholic. There's a lot of don't talk about it kind of stuff there. I try to throw stuff in their face and they literally look right past it. But my dad himself, my father who raised me, has been very supportive. So that's made all the difference in the world. Like, he just doesn't care as long as I'm happy. Anyway, so that was long-winded. And I'm gonna pass the baton to someone who wants to talk.
I think we've all shared maybe, and I think we were kind of on the first question, but if anyone has any words just to like touch on, if they didn't get to, like what's really brought resilience. And then we're gonna close with just kind of everyone maybe sharing if like what they wish they would have heard, or you know what you'd want to share with queer youth now. So that's kind of where we're going. But if there are any other just words kind of like speaking to resilience that you just want to speak on, what's brought you resilience in your experience, then just open that up for a little bit.
Yeah, and please share, like, I would love for us all to share the joys of our queer lives. Like, talk about the best part of your queer life, because I want these youth to know that that is a possibility for them. We all know that queer youth, you know, suffer a lot of violence and suicide. So we want to show that no matter how hard it feels, that there can be, get to a better place.
I would love to speak a little bit to the resilience, because I didn't do that much in my first piece, or my little piece that I did. because all of the hard things that happened and all of the struggles and the challenges that were part of growing up in a kind of a small town in Oregon, I had some pretty amazing people that were also around me and really did, protect me and lift me up as much as they possibly could. I would say that I was very lucky that we had two very outspoken, supportive teachers in school that were our kind of that were our advisors for the GSA, and went to bat with us, or went to bat for us all the time. I even had one of them that lied to my mother directly about having not seen me at the GSA, like just really, really did what they could in their positions to help us. But also I feel like it was my drive to go out and find community and find people that would support me. And I have, wonderful chosen family and wonderful community around me, in so much that it makes my family very upset that I don't need them in the way that they want me to need them. I don't need my biological family. I went out and found my own family because it was important to me. And those people have been really supportive and awesome to me. And I will say too, that like, for me, I haven't really talked about much about my sexuality, but I dated primarily women growing up and in my young adulthood, and then realized kind of halfway through and partway through my gender transition that was shifting a little bit. And I looked at I was joining sort of the BDSM leather community, and I was looking at these people, like these big burly, guys all clad in leather, and I was like, I'm never gonna get to be that guy. That's gonna, that's a dream I can't have. And it's not true. And in fact, that there were three of us in the Oregon State leather contest in a row that were all trans men. And that was a huge piece of joy for me, getting to be kind of sashed into being Mr. Leather by a trans man, getting to sash another trans man into being Mr. Leather. That was just an incredible piece, because then the joy of looking in the mirror and being like, yeah, that's the place I was trying to get. That's the place that brings this gender euphoria, or this sort of, I feel really comfortable and really happy in the way that I look and the way that I'm presenting and the communities that I'm a part of. I have been just remarkably lucky in that way, that I've really found a home in quite a few places and in quite a few communities, and that there has been so many shifts and changes in those spaces to be more inclusive and more aware and more all of those things. And I really would love to be able to further that work and keep making those spaces better and more inclusive, so that kids that are looking at the sort of the Lauren Cameron book, right? I remember looking at that at the Body Alchemy book too, as a young person, being like, oh my God, that's what my body could look like. I had no concept. Trans women were very prominent in media in sort of probably a negative way, very kind of jokey way, but I understood that it was possible for a person to transition from being male or masculine presenting to feminine presenting. No concept that it could go the other direction. No visual representation of what that could look like or feel like or what have you. And so having that media was really important. And I'm super excited that youth today have more access, at least virtually, to these things. And I'm excited to make a list of the resources and media further on that may have been missed because they're a little bit older, but definitely classic and should be shared. So just wanted to say that the euphoria is out there. The place you want to get is out there. It's possible. And I will be open by saying too that I'm a 2-time suicide attempt survivor as being a young person. And because I didn't have a concept that I could get out and things could be different. And, the whole it gets better thing is a little tricky because sometimes it gets much, much worse before it gets better. But just sort of hang in, find your people, and do the best you can.
I'd like to jump in and piggyback off of that, if everyone's okay with that. I think for me, thinking looking back at high school and junior high, I shared there wasn't really a lot of external resilience, and I think that that's true. But when I was going through grad school, I chose to pursue therapy not just as a base requirement, but I really needed to work shit out. And really early on, it became clear that my therapist was heterosexual, but all that bullshit. I was like, okay, I need to have this really frank conversation with you. I think it was session 1 or 2, and she's like, okay, cool. I was like, I need to be able to trust that I can bring homophobia in here and process with it and be angry with it. And I need you to be able to handle that. And she's like, okay, give me your worst. And so I didn't give her the worst like experience that I've been through, but I gave her a lot. And she's like, that is fucked up. And that is wrong that you went through that. And she didn't apologize. She didn't be like, well, I've done this, I've marched in the parade. Like, she didn't give excuses for why she was better. She just validated that it sucked that I went through that. And in that moment, I realized I never had anyone, even my best friend in my life, to be like the angry gay around. Like, based on how I was raised, like, anger wasn't expressed in my household. It was just not something that was okay to do. So I struggle with my relationship with anger, but that's a different conversation. But being the angry gay, I never had a space, I never had a person where I could be upset and angry and furious and hurt and alone in my experience of homophobia. And so I like, that was magical. And I reached out to my best friend and I reached out to my supervisor, clinical supervisor, who was also unfortunately cishet, but whatever. But I was like, hey, can I have an angry gay moment? He's like, I was like, not like that. He's like, oh, okay, cool, yeah. But, and so I think if there's anything for youth that I would really recommend is find queer spaces, find queer media, all that. Also have at least one person that is able to handle, ideally understand and resonate, but is able to handle you just being angry and upset and hurt with the experiences that you've gone through. And even today, like with my current supervisor, I've brought in, not today, but I brought in supervision a few weeks ago. I was like, I just need to complain right now. And she's like, okay. And we went off and like she interrupted me. She's like, no, it is fucked up and it is wrong. It is wrong that you've gone through that. It is wrong that you should step in this world and feel the way you do. It is wrong, 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 wrong. And it feels so good to not be the person on the other side of the table having to come up with a 10+ bullet point checklist and PowerPoint for explaining why we deserve to be upset about a world that is better and has drag race. And you know, I love drag race, but you know, a world that's not homophobic anymore. It feels so good to be around people that get it. You know, the world's fucked up. So at least find one person to complain about, like everything you've gone through, because that was really helpful for me and being able to have like, oh, it is okay to be angry sometimes about this. We don't have to be grateful that the world is getting better, you know. So that was really, really powerful for me. And find positive, if you can, like find positive popular media made by queer people for queer people. I had Yowie back in high school, and that is not positive representation in my opinion. But like, I am a basic white bitch, and I love Drag Race because it is for queer people, by queer people, featuring queer people with queer production. Like, it's very healing for me to watch that. And now we have Steven Universe and She-Ra, and we have all this stuff out there that's incredible. And Pose is incredible. Paris is Burning. Find something positive and find someone to complain to. That's kind of my advice and something that really got me through a lot of what I had to go through. So, and I'm still on my path of healing, unfortunately, but I'm happy that I'm on it.
So I'll jump in. I haven't really addressed that question number 3 around resilience. In my journey to building up my own self-esteem and self-worth, and then also finding queer joy. I remember when I was a senior in high school, I remember that was when Bush was being elected to his second term as president. Sitting in front of my TV and watching that happen at the same time, the Measure 36 was passed in Oregon, defining marriages between one man and one woman, and feeling really vulnerable and defeated. And then finding community when I got into college and starting to come out to myself and having my first relationships. And when I found that queer community at SOU, and I found that there was a way to have agency and advocate for myself, to advocate for my community, to work in solidarity with other communities, to examine my privilege, that felt really freeing. That brought me a lot of resilience and hope in being able to work toward things that I could use my agency to create change, to create it for myself and to create it for the ones that I love, to help work toward that. And that, to this day, has brought me a lot of solace, a lot of resilience, in being able to learn, constantly be in this process of learning and exploring myself and learning about others' experiences that are different than mine. To look at what I share and don't share with the experiences of repression of others, and to look at what agency I have, what I can and should be doing. And when I went to SOU, I kind of dove into that head first. I was associated with the Gender Sexuality Union. I had different positions with the student government. I was the student liaison to the Gender Sexuality and Women's Studies program. I worked a little bit with the Lotus Rising Project, which was an organization in Southern Oregon that unfortunately doesn't exist any longer, but it was a youth-led social justice organization that had the Not Straight, Not Sure youth group, and then also later managed an alternative prom and a couple other programs. But when I was going through that experience, that really opened me up to so many people in the community and showed me decades of resilience. The start of queer organizing in Southern Oregon, a lot of it happened around the double murder of a couple women in like 97, 98, Michelle Abdel and Roxanne Ellis. And meeting people who responded to that. And meeting people who really helped start the organization that came from that and was named from them, the Abdel Ellis organization, and then looking at what happened at many generations after, and still knowing some of those people. Those people are still invested in the community. They still do a lot, and seeing all the other newer people who are coming up through that, it shows me this history of resilience, this history of love, and pride, and I know that word gets really overused at this point, and this month that we're going into is one that's always really hard for me, because I don't really care about most pride celebrations that are just drowning in glitter and rainbows and all kinds of corporate ads, when I don't want the recognition of 1 month. I want it every day. I want that to be taken seriously in terms of examining systems of repression and the violence of the justice system, the violence of ICE, the violence of US as a whole, as a colonizing, occupying force, to examine all kinds of things. But I think that when I do actually think about that, I have so much pride for my community. I definitely see Southern Oregon as the core of my heart. And so when I was able to really ingrain myself in that community, that brought me so much resilience and also queer joy. I'll never forget, there was a project that I can't remember who started it, but it was a project where they were taking submissions, starting with the words, "What I love about being queer." And there was an art installation, there's something like that. And I write poetry, I do spoken word poetry. And I wrote a piece on that of like what I love about being queer, so that I could actually pay homage to the ones in my life that I love for the reasons that I love them and why I love my community, and that it's full of joy and creativity and amazing brilliance, and not just suffering or having to survive from day to day, but a lot of happiness. I think that the only other thing that I would like to say about that is that it can often feel tenuous, that things are always changing, that even as something is kind of dangled in front of the queer community, like marriage equality, and then passed, it feels like that is just a tiny, tiny piece of addressing the systems of oppression that impact the queer community every day. And then things are often repealed and changed from there. That I try to remember the many, many generations that have come before me. And then the many generations that are going to come after, and they're going to create all kinds of amazing things and do all kinds of amazing work. And that it's okay to step away. As much organizing as I did in my 20s, I'm in my 30s now, and I'm examining how tired I am for many years of not addressing my previous history of trauma. And then also feeling like I don't always have the capacity to keep up with 20-year-olds. I just don't. But that's okay. There's many different ways to be able to put that activism into action. And many ways of being able to just step back and examine what makes you feel stable and makes you feel joyful. But you can find resilience in so many ways, and remembering to reach out and ask for help when you can't feel it. There are so many people that are so invested and really care about, especially the young ones, when being so young, you can feel so vulnerable and so alone. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wrote down so many wonderful things. I feel like I could sit here all day with everybody, but I do want to respect people's time situations here. So we're about 6 minutes to the hour, and I don't want it to feel rushed. So I guess what I would say is that if anyone has to go imminently and you want to say something else, please feel free to do so that you have that opportunity before you have to go. And I'm not saying that whoever doesn't has to stay and keep, deep diving, but I just want it to be open for anybody who wants to. And I think I just wanted to reflect back a few things that I really liked, that I heard. I love the term that you're using, Sophia, queer joy. I think that's a powerful term, and it's not a term that's been in my mind, but I really, really like that, as well as Connor used a term of gender euphoria, which I thought was really great. So I love those terms, and I wanted to re-emphasize our message to the queer youth to please reach out and ask for help, even if you don't feel it. I quoted you on that, Sophia. Sorry. We don't need to lose queer kids to this, so let's fight the good fight. I also, I wanted to just name that coming out is not the end all be all of being queer. And I want that to be clear in our message to youth, that if it's not safe, you don't have to do it. You're not betraying your community or yourself by making that choice. I want to reflect back also what you touched on, Sophia, about, the glittery pride parade not being your thing. And, we're not all obligated to be activists in the same ways. And living your life and getting real with ourselves, being true to ourselves in the best and safest ways that we can is our activism. That is enough if that's what you can do. You don't have to have a rainbow flag to be an activist. I just So kind of in a closing, I wanted to just throw out there, if anyone feels like there's a question that we didn't ask that you feel like you wish that we had, or something that we didn't cover that you think could be important. If it's big or if it's multifaceted and tangential, maybe we can try to do something like this again, or we can at least put it out there and then offer resources in, you know, what we provide as far as media and stuff. So yes, is there anything?
I would love if we could just maybe wrap up our round of checkouts of just like, what would your message be to queer youth, even just briefly I mean, anyone who wants to, no one has to.
Or their cis het therapists too. Yeah, potentially.
I'm at 3 o'clock, so I want to get on this. My message for queer youth is being queer in any level, in any capacity, even if it's transient or questioning or anything like that, and breathing is a political statement. Period. End of sentence. End of paragraph. End of book. It is a political statement. You do not need to be marching. You do not need to be throwing bags of shit at certain political parties. You don't have to do anything like that. You are political. And any degree of out or closeted or variation thereof or something not even on that is political. So please. And as a queer therapist, as an out queer therapist working with people that do not identify, it blows my mind how the concept of just believe them can be difficult for some of my colleagues to understand. I think that if there is any advice as a queer person and as someone that was a queer client for a cis het therapist, it is the best thing that you can do is believe the experiences we are going through. That's the best advice that I can give. Believe their gender identity, believe their stage of transition, believe whatever they're in, just believe them. So I gotta get going, but this has been absolutely lovely.
Thank you, Andrew.
For letting me be present. And Erin, that mullet is iconic. I'm growing mine out. I wish it looked half good.
I can't wait to be back in the office with you, Andrew. This is
You
torture.
in the grow-out phase. You're looking good.
It's getting there. But thank you all. Bye.
Bye. I want to like just second that what Andrew just shared and just speak that like as someone who's feels a little bit stuck, like I realized I've come out to my family before and they were like, no, that's not a thing, and I was like, oh, okay, and so I think if there's anything I would say to queer youth, to therapists, to just being human right now is like, yeah, the space to just say yes to every piece of ourselves and yeah, try and if possible, because the world is sometimes giving us all the messages not to like trust ourselves and to like trust what you are, and like for me, like trust who I am. So yeah.
I'd like to jump on that a little bit. What Desiree was saying, I would second that. If there's anything that I have really come to understand in my life through the losing of family and communities and all of those things, it is, and this would be my message to queer youth and even, you know, in an indirect way to therapists working with queer youth. The learning how to belong to yourself, whatever that looks like, because it might change throughout time as you're figuring it out, as you're learning more about yourself, as you age, as you redefine yourself. It's so important to learn how to be so honest with yourself about who you are and accept that, because it's not going to change. It's not going to go away. It's there. It's who you are. And for therapists, you know, learning how to, you know, this is even that in of itself is something that a lot of therapists will help people, you know, in coming to terms with themselves or learning learning how to be, and that's really important as somebody who's queer as well, and in any part of the gender spectrum, that is a really important thing, to know how to belong to yourself. And another thing on top of that is, I would say, in regards to community, and albeit I know that especially these days, the pride parades and all of those things get really corporatized, and it's all the glitter and all of the things, but I'll tell you something, man, small town kids, find your way to a city here and there. Just do it. Find your way to a pride parade. Find your way to something, because I'll tell you, like back in 2002, I think it was roundabout, when I had moved to Seattle and I found myself my first girlfriend, my partner, you know, and I went to my first pride parade. And granted, it wasn't quite as corporatized as it is now, but being surrounded by so many queers, and you get to see all of these faces and all of these people that are just cheering and yeah, and you know, and especially I've been to there was an amazing, like, even a couple of different shows of queer strength and amazingness by the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, clowning around and talking down to the protesters and whatever, and it was awesome, you know, because we got to see, like, this is us, and we're standing out. And for me at the time, when we got to join into the parade, and we walked out there into the middle of the street towards the tail end of that, and I'll tell you something, for me at that time, like, coming out to myself was huge. Using an entire community, like stepping out into the street with somebody that I love and care about, and to just show it all off, felt so amazing, because everybody was cheering, and I felt so together with everyone around me, and it was really amazing. And so I would at least say, I mean, even if you don't go to a pride parade, whatever, go to some kind of gay event if you want to, but find a big city, find a group of queers, even if you go for like a little trip or something, find a place where it is a bubble of amazing queer activity, and you can at least be surrounded, even if it's for a very short period of time, just to give you hope, to give you something to hold on to give you some strength. Because even if you can't find that friend right then, or if you can't find a therapist or whatever it is, you can at least find that space, because it's always happening. So that's my messages.
And I'm going to tag on to Erin's message there. And the things that I want to say to queer youth. The first thing I want to tell you is, if you're living in Southern Oregon, there is a piece of land that has been owned by queer people for the last 35 years outside of Wolf Creek. And you should make your way to a celebration there if that feels like something that would be comfortable for you, because you'll be surrounded by people that you would never meet anywhere else. And that was very eye-opening and life-changing for me. If I had known that space existed when I was living in Southern Oregon, I probably would have ran away to the ferries as a young person. So yeah, definitely, like, find your people, whether that means like go online and you play video games, or you go to a big city and you go to a pride parade, or you're really into cosplay, or whatever your thing is. Find your people who are going to accept and also encourage you to be yourself and to explore and to do new things. Like, I think even other queer people can be kind of limiting sometimes. So, you know, just finding people that really encourage you to be yourself as much as possible, and also understand that, like, there is no end goal. Like, coming out's not the end goal. Even if you're trans, like, there is no point in my transition that's felt like an end goal. It's a process. It's all a process. You might get to a place where you feel the most comfortable or the most secure or the most safe, but, like, always be willing to keep exploring what makes you happy and what moves you forward. And also, like, know that there are adults in whatever town you are in. There is somebody who can support you. And while finding those people might be hard depending on where you are, I think the advent of the internet really helps us with that. And that, you know, there are ways to connect with people now there never were. And additionally, besides finding your people and finding your joy, I think one thing that's really, 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 really important is to know your history and to understand that queer people throughout ages have been through way crazier time periods and have endured so much stuff. And that, like, that's where I find strength, is like there are ancestors beyond me who have dealt with way worse things and pushed and fought and did all of those things. And that I hope, as a queer adult, to live in a future where I don't know what the kids are doing, where they're exploring something new, they're doing different genders, they're doing something that I don't quite understand because it's not my experience, but I'm so happy as long as we make a space for that experience to happen. So I think that that's really important. And that, like, that's part of me keeping growing and keeping moving, I think, is just being aware that, like, there's going to come a time where I'm not going to quite understand what the queer kids are doing. And I'm so stoked to see that moment. You know, like, I'm so stoked to see, like, whatever is next, because I don't think that our ancestors could have conceived about where we're going to be right now, or where we are right now, and we can't really conceive of what's going to be in the future. So yeah, I think that is my message to queer kids in small towns, and that know that, like, there are a lot of us that got out and that we exist on the internet. And, you know, I think that we, at least me personally, am absolutely willing to be a support person, or at least a information, resources, whatever, to people who need them. And whatever small town you're in. And for the practitioners, I will say that a cis, straight, white lady practitioner really helped me as a young person, as a therapist. I think she's still a therapist in Medford. She's awesome. And that, like, I think I have to echo what Andrew said before me. Just believe them when they say that this is a thing that I am going through, or this is a thing that I feel, or this is a thing I'd like to experiment with, and don't try to push them into any particular narrative. You know, like, whether that is to identify some way or come out or whatever, just let them work through whatever they're working through. And by just saying, like, hey, I'm a supportive person, I'm your therapist, or I'm your counselor, I'm your school guidance counselor, whatever, and I believe what you have to say, and I'm going to support you in being able to do that, I think are invaluable. Those are the two pieces that I think made it possible for me to realize that I could identify this way, and there were safe people, and I could get out, and that my little insular world of super religious, super abusive, super terrible family was not the whole world. And in fact, I could just walk away from them. And that's complicated for some folks, but I think that was the best choice for me. And to just be like, nope, I don't want a part of any of this. I'm going to go find my own people and do my own thing. And that has made all the difference. So yeah, that's what I have to say. Thanks everybody for sharing.
I
Thank
forgot
you.
we had that same therapist.
What's that?
I said I had forgotten that you and I saw that same therapist.
Yeah, Marika
Lisinski. She still practices in Medford. She's an LCSW.
Yeah.
And as in my time with her, I was not exploring gender or sexual orientation openly, but she was fabulous. So it's wonderful to hear that she was really good for you and you know, your particular journey.
Yeah, I think that she did a lot of really non-invasive or aggressive therapy techniques, where it wasn't like she just stared at you and talked to you. It was a lot of, like, we're going to build this sand tray, or we're going to draw this picture, or, you know, and we're going to talk through that process, which I think was really also good, and a good technique when you're trying to support people who don't quite know how to talk about what's happening yet. So, yeah, she's awesome.
Which means that having a cis white het therapist is not necessarily going to be detrimental to our process.
And kind of speaking off from that, I guess my advice for queer youth is oftentimes religion is stigmatized, or we're seen as an oppressive thing, and it is historically, but also there are safe places if religion is very important to you. And so reaching out to those communities, or if you are attending a church, or you're in some kind of setting that is unsafe because of religious practices, but you still want to kind of follow that faith, there are places you can go. And so especially in Southern Oregon, there's a couple churches out there. And then I think my advice for therapists is that my feedback working with people who identify as queer is that sometimes they have to be an educator about what their identities are, and that feels oppressive and limiting and sometimes unsafe. And so as a therapist, your responsibility is to always constantly educate yourself and be ready to do work outside of the session to be able to support somebody, and the consequence for not doing that is you could really shut somebody down and make it unsafe to get services.
Just a small tag on to that. We can add this to the resource list, but there is a website called welcomingcongregations.org. That is a really awesome resource if a faith community is something that you would like to keep in contact with as an LGBTQ person. I've met the person that runs this group. They're super awesome, and it's a great resource.
I'd love to tag on to a little bit of what Michael has shared and what pretty much everyone has said so far, and that's the one thing that I wish someone had told me when I was a teenager and in my 20s or early 20s and stuff was, you don't owe it to anyone to fit yourself inside of a specific label or box. You don't owe it to anyone to know exactly who you are or what you're into at any point in your life. You know, human beings evolve, and who knows, you may be figuring stuff out well into your adult life, and that's okay. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. There is no specific point in your life where you're supposed to wake up one day knowing exactly, you know, who you are, who you're into, what you like, etc. You don't owe that to anybody. And my advice for practitioners would be, you know, kind of similar to Michael's. It is your responsibility to keep yourself informed. And, you know, sometimes the best thing you can do in a situation is to refer out. And if that is the best choice, then don't let your ego get in the way of doing that.
All right.
Well,
Oh,
oh.
sorry. Please share. Yeah, sorry.
No worries. So my final thoughts of what I would share is to say, take your time. You have time. Getting to know yourself is a long process, and there's no one way to do that. And so everybody deserves whatever time they want and need to be able to get to know themselves. And as others have said, whatever that is, nobody is owed that explanation. So take your time. And the other thing is that I did an exercise with a group of high school youth for the GSA Visit Day at University of Oregon as a part of a queer history presentation, where I had them write cards to themselves to open in 10 years. Because I think that they deserve queer futures. And my prompt to them is, I dream of a queer future that is. Because I think that they deserve a future that is all of the things that will be incredibly joyful and hard in some ways, and will run the gamut of all of the human emotions. I think that they deserve to experience all of those things, and to lead a life that has all of the things that are a part of the human condition, that they can experience all of those things, including joy. The thing that I would say to practitioners is that I think you have a responsibility to learn. And there's a lot of ways of learning, as simple as doing a Google search. But I also think that it's one thing to read literature, read stories online. I think it's also important to research your own community, to know about opportunities that are available to youth, and to share those. And as people have said, that it's been so liberating to be able to find community, to be surrounded by other queer people, to know those opportunities for them to be able to go and be among their peers and be among their community.
Thank you. Did anyone else not get to share or have a message they wanted to share? All right. I'm feeling so grateful for this group and everyone sharing stories and visions and resilience. feel like this is super powerful. And I want to thank Nicole for calling this amazing group of people together and putting this out into the community here in the Rogue Valley. It's really needed. And thank you, each of you, for showing up. And yes to queer futures and queer joy and all of the things that are changing this world. So yeah, deep bows to all of you. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
all so
joining.
much for taking the time. And I'm gonna offer my email address as I stated before. So if there are questions from anybody who sees this and they're directed toward anyone individually, I'll make sure to make that connection. If we don't end up doing another recording, at least to maybe give an email address to a specific person that could be helpful. Just want to keep that open so that we're not just talking at our queer youth, we're communicating with them and we're receiving that as well. So I know we're all passionate. I know we've all been through a lot. You're all so beautiful. I can't tell you how much joy I feel seeing your faces.
Thank you all for putting this together. This has been a really awesome experience, and I hope we get to do more of them. I would be definitely down to do more of them on different topics or what have you. And then also available for if people have direct questions. And yeah, I'm going to sign off because I got to go take care of my dog. But I was also really excited to get to wear my rainbow State of Oregon shirt.
Yeah.
Awesome. Change. Yeah, so it was really lovely to be with you guys, and then thanks for putting this together. And I would love to see the finished product too, like the recording, to make sure I can nitpick at how I was sounding. So
I'll make
yeah,
sure everyone gets access. I'll let everybody know as soon as we have it, like in a
Yeah.
form that you can get that way. Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Connor. Take care. All right, everybody. So I think our MSW group is probably going to check in after this, but I just want to open it up for any more conversation. If Sophia or Aaron, if you have anything that you want to just throw in before we close it up.
No, not necessarily anything in particular to add to the conversation, mostly just a wrap up and a goodbye of thank you for having me a part of this. And it was lovely to meet everyone and hear all of your stories. And it felt very good to be a part of it. And if there's anything moving forward in the future, hopefully I can be a part of that as well. And I like the idea that we are potentially, and this is maybe one little great resource for kids. So I'm very appreciative that you all put this together. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And I'm signing out, and I will maybe hopefully talk to you all later.
All right. I love you dearly. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right.
Sophia, do you have your poetry up anywhere? I also do poetry, so I'm always into it.
Oh yeah, I appreciate that. There's some of it on my Facebook. So, oh boy, depending on whether or not, Nicole, is your friends list open? Can you see all of your friends?
No, it's not open, but I can connect you to there.
Okay, yeah. Some of it is in
Do that.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Choose there.
And this has been wonderful. Thank you so much to all of you. I really appreciate you doing this. Much love. And Nicole, I miss you.
I miss you too.
Yeah. I will definitely
so
drop
much.
you in whenever, sometime in the future, I end up back in Southern Oregon. But yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I appreciate you so much, especially since you named how tired you are. I feel it, that 30s vibe.
Yeah, I really appreciated that too, by the way. I was like, I am fucking tired of fucked up systems and all the things. I'm just like tired and the world's collapsing and I'm tired. And that's like,
Are you, How many of you have seen Hannah Gadsby on Netflix? The Nanette video? Yeah.
So
So